out is, was there a rich dad or is it pure fiction? So many people have come out to me and say, well, somebody said there really wasn't a rich dad. It's on the web and all this. And I go, well, how in the world would they know? You know what I mean? And so, well, I read it on the web. And I'm like, well, how would you know? But today's show is a great show because we'll actually be talking to Rich Dad's son. Any comments there, Kim?
Well, this is so exciting. So we've never, ever done this. Rich Dad's son has never done an interview with us or with you, Robert, ever since launching the book. So this is a first. This is a real first. And stay tuned because what you're going to hear are a lot of great stories about entrepreneurship. So if you have a business, thinking about a business, if you really want to know what it takes, you're going to hear some fantastic stories.
And then you'll hear from two, Rhodes and Merit scholars. So we were surfing and all this, and we were kind of oddballs, but we had a great time surfing, and we both flunked out, and that was tough because my old man was the head of education, and here I am surfing and flunking out and having a great time. Yet if it wasn't for my rich dad, I don't know where I'd be today because he taught his son and me to be entrepreneurs. And so today's program is, was there really a rich dad?
Because we know there's a poor dad.
Yeah, we know there's a poor dad.
Your dad was the poor dad. Worked his butt off and ended up with
nothing.
Broke.
And my poor dad was, a PhD, head of education, went to Stanford, University of Chicago, Northwestern, University of Hawaii, but he knew nothing about money. And so most of the time we were just surfing, having a great time. So that's what this program is about, is the lessons learned and some of the stories from Rich Dad, who was a hardcore entrepreneur. Now, we can't tell all the stories because this is kind of a family show. But anyway, we'll do our best.
There's some good stories.
So before we introduce Rich Dad's son, we're going to explain why we've never disclosed. We're coming on the 20-year anniversary of Rich Dad Poor Dad. It came out in 1997, April 1st, but we had to be private about it. And it was really tough because when Oprah called in the year 2000, she says, you're not going on the program unless you can prove there's a rich dad. So take it from there, Kim, because you had to prove it, right?
Yeah, because and you made the agreement with Rich Dad's family, Robert, that when you came out with the book, they said, yes, you can write about it, but keep us anonymous because they're a very, very private family. So when Oprah producer called and said, we want Robert on the show, we were all excited. This was the dream of my life. I had all the affirmations and Post-its around, want to be on Oprah. And she gets me on the phone and she says, you must tell me who Rich Dad is. And I said, well, Robert's out in the boondocks of Australia chasing Skippy the kangaroo, and we have an agreement, and I cannot do that. And she kept at me, and she was screaming at me over the phone, you must tell me who Rich Dad is, or Robert's not going on the show. And I'm like, oh, my God. And so I said, I can't believe I'm going to say this to you. I cannot believe it, but if that's what it's going to take, we have an agreement with the family. I cannot disclose, and if that's what it's going to take, Robert's not going to do the show. And I hung up the phone, and I was, like, petrified. And thank God 2 minutes later, she calls back, and she goes, okay, how are we going to make this work? And so what I did is I called Rich Dad's son, and I said, you do not have to do this. This is not you don't have to do this. If you want to, great, but we're not required to do it. If you want to give her a call and explain about Rich Dad, great. If not, no problem. And he was gracious enough, made the call to the producer. The producer was happy, and they were vetted, realized there is a rich dad, and they were happy, and the show on Oprah went on, and the rest is history.
So all you guys out there who say, well, there really wasn't a rich dad, and you believe those idiots out there, this is your show, because you're going to find out there really is or was a rich dad. And today we'll be talking to Mike, that was his name in the book, but his real name is Alan. We had to change all of his names and all that. So today's a very special program on near the 20th anniversary of Rich Dad. So welcome to the program, Al.
Welcome, Al.
Thank you, Rich Dad Ohana. And thank you, Robert, for inviting me to come on and share some of our history together.
And lessons.
And what I'd like to do is two things. Honor my dad, who's passed away for 6 years now, and who was always very anonymous in his appearance, in his persona, in his knowledge, unless it dealt with people that could help our family. Because he's a traditional Hawaiian where when there is publicity, what comes with it is jealousy. So he had always told me, Al, you stay low-key, you just do what you do, and the good will come out later on.
So when I wrote Rich Dad Poor Dad, I had to get your agreement, right? That your name was not going to be used. I had to change your name.
Yes, yeah. And no one said anything until it became successful. Then I think 100 people claimed to be Rich Dad.
That's right. They came out of the woodwork, didn't they? Everybody was guessing.
Yeah. So I asked my dad, I said, hey, where are you at? And he says, nope. He said, when I'm gone, it's fine. But while I'm alive, no, I think there's an honor to being anonymous.
Yes,
right.
Yes. And you took over the family business, Al, right?
Yes,
So
I have.
So you're...
The other thing I wanted to share with the audience was that when Robert and I were going to school, in grade school, meaning 8th, 9th, 10th, all the way to senior, I was a skinny, sickly kid. Robert was a large Japanese American who played on the football team, and nobody messed around with Robert. So somehow Robert and I, because alphabetically in the public school system, we sat next to each other by K last names, we were always together. So when people picked on me, Robert, as a dear friend many, many years ago, would take them outside and beat the shit out of them.
You got to have a friend like that.
So he became my protector, and I've always remembered that, Robert, and I've never shared that with you until now.
Oh, wow.
Well, thank you. Once again, we're talking, it's a very special radio program. The question is, was there a Rich Dad, or is there a Rich Dad, or was I lying and all this? Very special programs because Rich Dad's son, my best friend when we're going through school, is today's guest. And we're just being respectful of his dad's wishes that they stay anonymous. And now for the first time, we're just really talking about it. What we want to do today is really talk about some of the lessons about, for all of you who want to be entrepreneurs. I mean, my poor dad was an employee, and he had an employee mindset, go to school and get a job. Whereas your dad had a very different point of view. And, one of the most important lessons I learned from your dad was when this guy Bobby wanted to unionize your company. Remember that?
Yes, in Hilo, that's right.
And I still remember you called me up and said we got to stand by because if the employees go on strike, we got to shut down the company, right?
Yes.
So tell that story if you could.
Well, in a plantation town like Hilo, where Robert and I are from, it was important that everything be unionized. So the tourist industry was just being born, and they went after the hotels, they went after the bus drivers, and needed to build membership. So they came to our hotel and was able to get a petition to start an election, and their ringleader was the manager. His name was Bobby.
Manager of your hotel?
Yes, he was the manager, but he was, I guess, the most unhappy. So we went through the election, which took maybe a year and a half because it was so complicated because my dad would not hire attorneys because he didn't have the money. So his deal was walk around with a baseball bat.
Aside and go to richdadfreesession.com and claim your free strategy session while they're still available. There is simply no faster way to turn your dreams and aspirations into actual wealth and financial success. So go to richdadfreesession.com now.
It's vital to protect yourself and your company. LLC, LP, S, or C Corp, let Corporate Direct guide you through the process of forming a corporation or LLC. Every business owner and real estate investor needs asset protection. Corporate Direct is owned by Rich Dad advisor Garrett Sutton and is Robert Kiyosaki's choice for corporate formation. Mention Rich Dad and receive $100 off a formation. Call 800-600-1760 or visit online at corporatedirect.com. That's corporatedirect.com.
Log on to richdadradio.com while you listen. Now back to Robert Kiyosaki.
Welcome back, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show. And today is a very, very special program. You know, for all you people out there who said there is a rich dad or there isn't a rich dad and it's a phony and it's a made-up story, this program is especially for you. So all you doubters and sinners out there, eat lunch. So anyway, today we have a very special program. We have Rich Dad's Son. For those who may not be familiar with the story, Rich Dad, Poor Dad is the story of our two dads. My real dad was head of education for the state of Hawaii. And Al's father was Rich Dad, and he started teaching us at around age 9 to be entrepreneurs.
And Rich Dad dropped out of school at, what, 13 or so?
Yeah.
I mean, he dropped out of school early.
But he had to run the family business and all this. The point here is the difference between an employee and an entrepreneur. And so for Al and I, and we called him Mike in the book, but we had to keep the family name out of the book. Out of respect for Rich Dad's wishes. But today, for the first time, is a very special program. Mike or Al is on the program to tell you some stories. How we grew up. We surfed most of the time. I don't know how we got anything done. We're flunking out of school. I don't know how we graduated from college. But somehow, I think having Rich Dad's education or Al's dad's education was probably more beneficial to me personally than going to school. And as you know, Rich Dad really never paid us. You know, he says you're getting something much more valuable, which is an education. You know, you actually learn by doing. So he kicked our butts a lot because he called us lazy kids. But, Al, you want to tell the story of having us pick up cigarette butts?
Gladly. I enjoyed bringing my C report card to my parents because...
You braggart.
And when it was a D or an F, in those days it was a pencil, so you could make some adjustments. But what happened was, one Saturday it was raining or something, and my dad worked 7 days a week. So he said, Al, come down to the hotel. He said, and bring that lazy guy, Keo, with you. I said, okay. So Robert and I both go down to the hotel. And Dad says, okay, you two bums. He said, That's
how he talked to us, too.
And I realize, Robert, he was just trying to save money. He didn't have the money to hire a gardener. So he gave each of us an empty can of Folgers, a container, and said, okay, Robert, you're going to take this wing, and Al, you're going to take the other wing. And your job is to fill the can with cigarette butts or cigar butts. And when you're done, you bring it back, and I'll give you a quarter or I'll give you a cheeseburger, whichever you want. So
I thought it was $5 he was going to give us.
Oh, no, that's when we were doing heavy labor.
Oh, okay.
And I think we settled for $1, Robert, because we were desperate. But when the first day, it was easy. We were done like in 15 minutes. So we brought the Folgers can back, all proud. We collected our 25 cents. We're all happy. We said, we got them. So the next day, Dad says, okay, be back here at 8 o'clock. Bring Robert with you, and we're going to continue. Folger, the same thing. Well, that went on every weekend for about 6 weekends. And then the hotel was clean because we had picked up all the cigarette butts. And there was no fresh source of junk. So what Robert and I, we looked at each other and we said, we're screwed. This is getting harder and harder, and this is BS. 25 cents for 4 hours of work, and we just can't find cigarette butts. So he and I says, I think what we got to do is let's outthink Fada. Let's find out where he's throwing all these cigarette butts. And I said, well, what are we going to do with it? He said, we're going to fill our cans. So then, because we're young and we're stupid, but we had guts. The next day, we got the cans. He gave us the cans. And 15 minutes later, we're back. Really not too smart. So Pop says, okay, you guys did your work? He says, yep. So Dad went in the back of his office where he had his pile, and he looked at it and he says, Keo, he called Robert Keo. He says, Keo, Al, he said, you don't have to do this anymore. Well, what do you mean? Are we getting fired? He says, no, you folks have potential to be businessmen now.
And we continued on.
That's right.
Hey, I got a question, Al. We hear all the lessons that Robert learned from your dad. I've met your dad and I've met Robert's dad. Did you have lessons that you learned from Robert's dad?
Yeah, Dr. Ralph was very straight arrow, very strict, very respectful to Robert's mother, and they were a family unit that I didn't have because my parents got divorced early. So I loved hanging around the Kiyosaki's house. Plus, the food was good. Mrs. K was a wonderful cook. But he was he was a tough educator and subsequently a bureaucrat, I guess, and saying that endearingly.
Yeah. Once again, it's the Rich Dad Radio Show. We're talking today. It's a very special program. We're talking to Mike, who was Rich Dad's son, but his real name was Alan. Again, we had to change the names out of respect to his dad. But I learned more from, having both dads and, things like teaching us how to think creatively, think outside the box. Like we went and stole back the cigarette butts we had picked up earlier because it was getting hard to make a living cigarette butts. But the other thing that happened, which was pretty interesting, was when my dad and Al's dad collided, was that Al's dad had a little village of rental properties. And I think it was in 1960 this tidal wave came through. So Al and I would have been about 13 years old. Yeah. And the tidal wave cleaned out Alan's dad's rental property because they're all on one property. And then the battle started between my dad and Al's dad because my dad was now head of the Hawaii Redevelopment Association, whatever they were. And my dad condemned Alan's dad's land. So basically my dad was going to take Alan's dad's land. And so I'd go home and I would just catch hell from my dad saying, well, that SOB, he wants too much money for it, and da-da-da-da-da. And I'd go back and I'd listen to Al's dad talking about, your father's going to condemn my land. So it's really the classic battle between capitalists and socialists.
But what happened though? What happened wasn't there a deal made about the land and where Rich Dad? What was that, Al?
What I learned was that just observing my dad when I wasn't working for him, I was just a kid, was that he fed on opportunity, going counter to the herds. So if there was a tidal wave coming at you, everyone would be running one way, he would jump into it. So when the tsunami in Hilo happened and it devastated downtown Hilo, Robert's father was correct in saying there cannot be redevelopment anymore because there's a tidal wave here every 10 years. And my dad, with his street sense, said, well, I'm going to be shut down here, but if I can get government help to rebuild, then maybe I'll go build a hotel. So the federal government came in and they were able to fund the redevelopment of what then became the original hotel in Hilo that Robert and I picked up cigarette butts at. Well, if Robert's father had said, hey, you can rebuild, I think we'd still have a village with rental properties, and that would have been it.
Wow.
So the tidal wave made your dad richer.
Yeah, it was the opportunity, yeah.
Yeah. And that was that's the way it went. There were several tidal waves. We're going to tell that story later on. But this is the lesson I learned from actually both dads. Is my dad was a good guy. He condemned all the land, but Al's dad always saw the opportunity in tragedy, or no matter what happened, there was always an opportunity. So that was in 1960, and then not too long later, another giant hurricane. It was a hurricane this time hit Hawaii.
Hurricane Iniki.
Oh, yeah. 1992.
Okay, Al, this is one of my favorite stories.
And by this time, Al's dad had a whole empire going of hotels because, as most entrepreneurs do, they use their funds to expand their business. So he had hotels on all the islands from one disaster. Yeah. So then this next hurricane hits the island of Kauai and cleans out your dad's hotel there, right? Just destroys it.
But what did he do? What did he do before the hurricane came?
Well, before he did the hurricane, because my dad did not fly because he was afraid of flying. So he lived on the phone, and he was a tremendous delegator of making sure that he was involved in every aspect of the operation, but hired smarter people than him.
That was
So
the
it
key to
allowed
success.
him to grow.
Success, yeah.
Yes.
He had a smart team around him, and they were sharp.
But when Hurricane Iniki came a couple of days prior, he said, "Okay, Al, what you're going to do is you're going to go to the bank and you're going to pull out." It was hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash.
Wow.
He said, and you're going to put them all in bundles and get ready, fly to Hilo, buy building materials, which is on the southernmost island from Kauai. But conventional people were not thinking of, okay, if something happens, number one, we got to wait for the insurance guy, which we didn't have to because we had cash. Secondly, we got to get building supplies on the island. Forget it. They made the prices triple. But back in Hilo, there was no threat of a hurricane, so there was materials ready.
Smart.
And they were Hilo laborers that were hungry for work.
So he had this all planned ahead of time in case this happens.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So when it hit, you sent your younger brother over there or something, right?
Yes.
Well, I also like how your relative got onto a helicopter, a media press helicopter.
Well, that was,
he had to get there, right? Nobody could get to the island.
That was me and my kid brother, who was a musician but is now a pastor. But that's a whole nother story. he convinced the ABC News plane to take us as humanitarian workers. So we jumped on board. We got to Lihue Airport. We ran from the plane because the National Guard knew we were not
supposed to be there.
News people. Yeah. And we just ran and looked for vans where tourists had just abandoned on the street and looked for, full tanks of gas. And that's how both Donnie and I were able to each get a van and maneuver our way back to our Kauai Sands hotel.
And didn't you guys you pay some National Guard guy who had a bulldozer to bulldoze the wreckage of your hotel into the ocean anyway?
Yes, that was once we realized it
was a total loss
by
anyway.
Blessing, that the National Guard team that guarded Kapa'a, where Kauai Sands was from the Big Island. So the Big Island people were
sticking together.
Yeah, they're sticking together, Robert.
But here's what I love is it's like whatever it takes. I mean, talk about street smart. Your dad options all the supplies. You guys figure out how to get to the island when nobody can get there. It's off limits to everybody. Figure out how to get to the hotel, and then you see the hotel is a mess. And then what did you do?
Well, the first thing Dad did was, okay, we've got to get 20 rooms built. 20 rooms built, no matter what it takes, because we're going to ship in 40 Hilo construction guys, and we're going to pay them cash out of Hilo and leave them a little bit allowance, have their wives or their girlfriends come pick up the money every Friday and give them allowance because they're only going to drink and gamble it away anyway in Kauai. But that's how we're able to get up and running in 7 months.
Name and all this because the family is very private, like many rich families are. They're very private. They don't want to know anybody that rich because then they have new friends all the time. So today we're telling stories about Rich Dad, and it's especially good for those of you who want to be entrepreneurs because most people come out of school, they're more like my poor dad. They think everything happens in a straight line. But as Einstein said, imagination is more important than knowledge. And unfortunately, my poor dad had knowledge. He had no imagination. And if you've been listening to this program, you can listen to it again because we archive our programs at richdadradio.com. You can listen to how my rich dad thought. He thought outside the box. He had a great imagination, which drove my poor dad nuts because he was not playing by the rules. Well, he never played by the rules. That's why he was rich. And there's so many stories we could tell, but we best not tell them. So anyway, Kim met him once, right? What was that like?
I did meet him once, and just as Al is saying, very, very unpretentious. I mean, when I met him, Al, he had this very small office. His couch basically went wall to wall, and it was pretty beat up. And he had a dirty white T-shirt, and he was chomping on a cigar, and he was pretty gruff. He was pretty
He had
pretty
rubber
blunt,
slippers on
pretty
and
blunt.
shorts.
I think we were in there for all of maybe 4 minutes.
But let's set this whole thing up. Is the reason the reason I let Kim start was that I made when I was starting the nylon and Velcro surfer wallet business. First of all, Rich Dad was always available if I wanted to talk to him. Except I never liked what he told me. He's stupid. I told you can't think. You slap me around. So one day I made the ultimate mistake as I drove up to him, and the wallet company was doing well, and all this, but we needed money to expand. So myself and John Rowe and Larry Clark, we dressed like the disco ducks. We drove up there in his 450 SL Mercedes, and we went up to Rich Dad, and I opened the door, and I sat down with him, and I asked for $100,000. And the reason the room was only the size of a couch is because square footage in Waikiki is expensive. So he just looked at Al and says, "Close the door. And you two clowns get out of here." So it was Larry and John Rowe. He kicked them out. Then I sat down. And what happened after that, Al?
Oh, no. Dad just reamed you.
What did he say?
He was screaming so loud, the secretary stopped working.
Yeah, he had just said, what the hell are you doing?
No, it wasn't hell. Clowns? It was F word.
Yeah, and you're showing me all these papers. He said, I understand these papers, meaning the financials, but you don't, Robert. Can you tell me what this means? Can you tell me cash flow, balance sheet, assets, liabilities? And you stumbled. And he said, you're as dumb as those two other clowns there. Don't waste my time.
Well, he also said, don't come back until you never need my money.
Yes.
And he told me the story. He says, you're like a camel. You're going halfway across the desert. You're going to run out of money. And then you come back to me again because you don't know how to make money.
Yeah, yep.
And he was screaming. And so, Al, you told the story. You were standing at the door trying to keep the vibrations down so the secretaries wouldn't hear it, right?
Yeah.
But then when I met
don't
him,
come back until you don't need money. You'll never need my money again.
And so when we did come back, when I met him for the first time,
this was years later.
Years and years later, we were doing well, and he looked at you, Robert, and he said, I don't know the exact words, but you understand, you got it. And it was like, okay, now get out of here.
Get the F out of here.
Yeah, so it really did come full circle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it took me a while to learn the lesson. And today, Al, this is the lesson for all of you, is I listen to people pitch me deals all the time. And I feel like your dad. I said, you stupid. And these people are just, like you say, dreamers. They don't have any experience. And they think me giving them money will solve their problem. I mean, you must see that all the time too, right?
Yeah, it's not instant happy.
Most people want money so they can live. They're not going to build a business.
No, they're just going to burn it.
Yeah,
and that's what Rich Dad was afraid that you were going to do.
And he was right, because I went bust right. I mean, we're very successful. The wallet business took off exactly as I said it would. The trouble is we couldn't sustain. In other words, this is what I say to most people: success is expensive. So we took off, but then we couldn't refinance we couldn't reinvest. So we started borrowing just so we could buy more inventory to feed the machine, and we couldn't sustain, and we went down. Right, Al?
You just got sucked into the whirlpool, yeah?
Yeah, success is expensive. And so one of the lessons when I talk to people who want to be entrepreneurs is, how can you afford to keep reinvesting to grow your company? And that's why the story of your dad, and my dad fighting about the first tidal wave that wiped him out, is that was his seed money to grow his business, right?
Yes. Well, but, on the other hand, Robert, you had one poor dad, and my dad was the original rich dad, but you've since had other rich dads that have guided you and Kim till today.
Yes.
So that in itself is a blessing, that it started something, but the opportunity is still there. Right. Well, more than ever now.
I think the greatest gift of all was that your dad, he says his greatest dream was to teach others to be entrepreneurs. He wanted to take young guys under his wing and teach them to be entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
I remember asking him one day, I said, well, what about me? He says, you're too effing stupid.
Yeah, but now look. As a result of Rich Dad Poor Dad, your dad is doing that. I mean, unbelievable through the success of the book. And let me ask you, Al, did your dad ever talk about Rich Dad Poor Dad or Robert and Rich Dad Poor Dad? Was he surprised at the success of the book? Did you ever have that discussion?
He was thrilled, and he was honored that he played a part in it. But other than that, my dad wasn't one to blow smoke or to hug or to praise. The results were in your global brand, Robert, Kim.
Yeah, I do remember you telling me, Al, about losing a few employees because they had read Rich Dad Poor Dad.
Yeah.
And you lost one because they had read this book and they were going to go out on their own, and then you lost a...
And they didn't know that you were the guy in the book.
No, they didn't know.
Yeah.
Your employees did not know.
And,
No.
And then another manager said, I just read this book and I'm going to do my own thing. And there was like 3 or 4 employees that left it. You told your dad, and he said something like, that Kiyosaki, it's killing me.
Tell them enough already.
Enough already. Love it. Yep, and they never knew it was you.
So anyway, I thank you for being a great friend for all these years and being supportive and, in memory of both our dads.
Yeah, how's that for an honor?
Yeah, the work goes on because both were great men. Both were great teachers, and they're both SOBs. But other than that, it's been a great ride, and I thank you and your dad and your family for making a contribution to the world.
Oh, and also thank you for teaching the world and continuing your education, and you're not stopping, which is wonderful.
No, and we're just getting started, really.
Good.
So thank you, Al. Thanks for being willing to share your story.
My pleasure.
So let's wrap this up. The lessons I learned from Rich Dad. For me, the biggest thing was that he wasn't rich when we met him, when Al and I were kids. But what happened over the years, I saw him get smarter and smarter and smarter because he was always outside the box. To be successful as an entrepreneur, there's no one right answer. So if I could leave you with that, he had multiple answers. He failed more times than he succeeded. But as the years went on, by the time I was in my 30s, not only was he much smarter, but he was a lot richer. On the other side of it, my poor dad, my real dad, got poorer and poorer and poorer simply because he wasn't learning anything new. He didn't make any mistakes until he ran for lieutenant governor of the state of Hawaii as a Republican. When he lost that election, he lost his job. My mother died. His uncle died. And he was unemployed. And my dad, who had never made mistakes, my poor dad, suddenly was faced with this huge disaster. He didn't have the skills to succeed as an entrepreneur. He tried, but he didn't have it. And that's why I'm so adamant about, people going to school. They're always saying, don't make mistakes. Do as you're told. And that's why Rich Dad was so successful. He didn't follow those ideas. And so for Kim and I today, we've made many mistakes. We've done a lot of things that are unorthodox and all this, but that's why we're successful. Because when you try something you've never done before, even if you fail at it, you get smarter. So if I could leave you with that idea. So I'm always doing things. Kim knows I do something not because I need to do it, but I do it because I need to make a mistake. When I make a mistake and do something stupid, then I have to figure out how I'm going to get out of that mess, right?
Yeah, and one thing I heard Al say is that Rich Dad always surrounded himself with people smarter than himself.
Right.
And I think that was one of the problems of your poor dad is because he was the academic, because he had to be the smartest one, he didn't surround himself with smart people. He thought he always had to have the answer, and I think that's why he didn't make it as an entrepreneur.
And today, in this this economic turmoil, the people that are really getting screwed and falling behind are the guys who were really smart 10 years ago. I meet so many guys. Well, I'm an accountant. I'm an attorney and all this, but the world has changed, and they can't change with it. So when I meet people who were, smart people 5 years ago, they're obsolete today. So if I could leave you with that's the reason I want to tell you some of the stories. I wish I could tell you all of them, because some of the things that Rich Dad did were best not said. They weren't illegally immoral and all that, but he was so outside the box because he had no money. So for all of you who are listening today, if I could leave you with that thought, if you have no money
to your business are everywhere. Choosing the right entity is a start, but basic asset protection isn't enough. You must take the next steps and follow the corporate formalities. If you don't, a creditor can pierce the veil of protection and get at your personal assets. Corporate Direct is owned by Rich Dad advisor Garrett Sutton and is used by Robert Kiyosaki to properly maintain his entities. Call 800-600-1760 or visit online at corporatedirect.com for corporate cleanup and resident agent services in all 50 states. Avoid a piercing of the corporate veil. Go to corporatedirect.com.
It pays to listen. Now, back to the Rich Dad Radio Show with Robert Kiyosaki.
Welcome back, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show. Once again, it's a very special program for all you doubters and naysayers out there who said there's no Rich Dad. Today's program, our very special guest was Rich Dad's son. He's called Mike in the book. His real name is Al. And we're talking about how we grew up.
Tourist magazines for the reopening of his hotel, and the sales ads people are like crazy, thinking he's nuts because there's no way you're going to get your hotel open that soon. And he goes, "You watch me." And so he already was up and running.
And as Alan said, they're up and running in 7 months. That was the most profitable time of their entire career because they're the only guys with 20 rooms available, and everybody had to go there. And they just kept raising the rates because it was supply and demand. And to this, I think that the hurricane hit in the 80s, and to this day, there's still hotels that are shut down on island of Kauai because they're still waiting for insurance money to do it. And so that's really what's happening. The whole point here is this. You don't get smart waiting to be told what to do. And that's how, and we had no money. You're going to hear some final words about what happens when you're willing to learn from a man like Rich Dad versus a man like my poor dad who was just doing as he was told. And so once again, this is the Ask Robert section. You can submit your questions to AskRobert@richdadradio.com. So what's the first question, Melissa?
Our first question today comes from John in Los Angeles. Favorite book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. It says, Robert, do you ever wonder what your life would be like if you never met your rich dad?
All the time. All the time. And that's why this program is so important, is because if I had listened to only my poor dad, today I'd probably be an airline pilot, or I'd be a guy driving oil tankers with Standard Oil. I'd be a good employee, probably making $500,000 a year. But what the most important thing about my rich dad, he taught me how to be a free human being. And you start by being free with your thoughts, that you can think freely without worrying of criticism and condemnation and legalities and all this. That's the most important thing. I just don't understand people saying to the kids, you got to go to school and get a job. I mean, you're actually crushing the kid's brain and imagination. Any comments, Kim?
Well, you told me a story, Robert, because all these stories are all about entrepreneurship, even though I don't know if you realized that at the time as a kid. But you also told me a story, and it went along with the cigarette butt story, picking up the cigarette butts. And
Alan was nice about that story. But Rich Dad was an SOB.
But didn't Rich Dad, he owed you a bunch of money?
Yeah, but he kept tricking us because we kept tricking him. And what he did finally was he said, okay, you go pick up this and I'll give you $5. But you have to really, because it was hard. Alan said there was no cigarette butts out there, so it was kind of hard. And when people said no opportunities, well, we have to go find more cigarette butts, but we couldn't cheat now. So we finally got the can, it's a gallon, fruit can of, coffee can of cigarette butts. He says, okay, I'll owe you $5. He said, you got to pay us. He says, I'll pay you next week. And I went, you got to pay us. He says, okay, you guys do it again. I'll give you $5 again. I'll owe you $5, and I'll pay another $5. So we went out, we did the same thing. And finally I started crying and screaming at him. He said, you SOB, why are you cheating two little kids? You don't know this. He says, I'm going to teach you a lesson. I said, what's that? He says, you guys, as long as you need money. Oh, no, what he did was then he finally discounted us down to $1 a can. So from $5 it went to $1 a can. And we're screaming and spitting and crying.
Didn't he say, I'll give you the $5 like in 2 weeks, or you can have $1 now today?
Something like that. He was always screwing around with us, messing with our brains, And finally, we took the $1 because we were so desperate. We'd gone like a month without any money. He paid us occasionally, but most of the time he didn't pay us, like 25 cents here and free hamburgers. But at the final, we took the money, and he was laughing. He was just laughing his ass off. I said, why are you laughing? He says, it's the most valuable lesson you can have. I said, what's that? He says, if you need money, you'll always work for less.
Good lesson.
And I never forgot that lesson. So even when I had no money, nobody knew I had no money. When I was pitching deals and I had no money behind me, nobody knew I had no money when I was pitching a deal. I always pretended like I had the financing in place. And that's the lessons. Okay? He was a tough teacher. Next question, Melissa.
Next question comes from Ellen in Bozeman, Montana. Favorite book, Unfair Advantage. Robert, do you consider yourself a natural entrepreneur? Even if you didn't have a rich dad, would you have made your way into entrepreneurship?
That's a great question. The answer is no. But I don't know if anybody's a natural. I mean, I know guys who are good entrepreneurs, but everybody is an entrepreneur. Henry Ford went bankrupt 5 times before starting Ford Motor Company. But in the school system, if you make one mistake, you're stupid. So that's why we play, tell the teacher we're surfing, because by all means, Al and I flunked out twice in high school. We couldn't write, we couldn't read in English. But it didn't stop us from becoming rich.
I would, and I question whether you say you would not be an entrepreneur because, number one, I don't know if anybody would ever hire you. That's another story. You do have an issue with authority, and I hate being told what to do, and I can't see you sitting still. So that's a good question. It's a good one to ponder because you were chasing gold when you were in Vietnam, and you were shipping back tables and.
But I was already being encouraged to be an entrepreneur
from early on.
That's
a good point.
Not punished. Next question.
Our next question comes from Clark in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Favorite book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. What advice do you have for getting along with family members who are not aligned with you financially?
That's a tough question, and I would just say leave dead dogs alone. No, leave sleeping dogs or dead dogs. I don't know if they're sleeping or dead.
Sleeping dogs lie.
Yeah, leave them alone. You see that?
Whatever.
No, although everybody can be an entrepreneur, most people should not be because it is so hard for me. I always say start small, make sure you can do one thing a little at a time and all this, get better at it. But most people don't have the patience. They want to get rich quick, right?
Yeah, most people don't have they think the same
too
old way. They're doing it the same old way. It's what you say, Robert. Go to school, get a job, save money, live below your means, all of that. And
do as you're told.
I got family members. That's their point of view. That's how they live, and so I don't talk finances to them. I've given them the books. I've told them our point of view, and it comes a point where let them go.
I have family members that come up to me and they show me their kids' report cards and they're all straight A's, and I said they're screwed. And family members look at me like I'm nuts. I said, why? The kids are straight A's too, and how can they be screwed? I said, because they can't think. They may be very smart academically, but they're not going to be smart financially or in the real world. As I say to a lot of people, the kid does very well in school, but when you shift environments, education, the classroom's one environment, but you shift to another environment like the football field or surfing, I'll kick the kid's ass. You know what I mean? So environments are everything, and most kids who are A students do well inside a classroom, but can they do well on the streets? And that's where Rich Dad was extremely successful. I'll say this again. He had nothing. He had no education. He had no money, but that made him smarter and better. And towards the end of his life, he had an empire. Most people who are just doing what they're told may not have that.
Next question, Melissa.
Our last question today comes from Todd in Pittsburgh. Favorite book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. It says, what would you say is the number one lesson you learned from both your rich dad and your poor dad?
It's to be this may sound strange, but to be honest and have integrity. But this is the difference, you see. What most people don't realize, the rules for an entrepreneur are opposite for rules of an employee. Just look at the tax rules. Employees pay a certain level of tax. Entrepreneurs pay no tax. So the whole thing is not only mindset different and the skill sets are different, but the rules are different. So a lot of times what my rich dad was doing, my poor dad said he was a crook. And when I became successful in Honolulu with my nylon Velcro wallet business, and the newspaper ran a story of me calling me an entrepreneur. This is in the 70s. My poor dad called me up and says, "That's terrible." I said, "What's wrong with being called an entrepreneur?" He says, "It means you're a crook." And that is the point of view of many socialists today. They see Donald Trump as a crook. They see rich people as crooks. But these guys are the academians, you know what I mean? The guys who know all the answers, but they can't do jack. All they have is a paycheck, and they invest in the stock market. So you're going to be an entrepreneur in business. You got to be an entrepreneur. You're going to do real estate. You got to be an entrepreneur. But the rules are different. Points of view are different. Our skill sets are different. And that's why, there'll always be opposing sides. Like a lot of people believe you should give poor people money. I just said that keeps you poorer longer, but we'll never see eye to eye on that. Final words, Kim.
Well, my final words is I think, your dad definitely, he was the educator, and your rich dad wanted to take people under his wings and teach them entrepreneurship. So one thing I see in you is you've actually become both your rich dad and your poor dad.
Right. So I'm an educator, but I teach people financial education, how to be an entrepreneur. Yeah. Once again, I want to thank all your questions. You can submit your questions to Ask Robert at richdadradio.com.
You've been listening to the Rich Dad Radio Show with Robert Kiyosaki. To learn more about the good news and bad news about money, go to richdadradio.com.
This has been a presentation of the Rich Dad Radio Network. Please subscribe to us on either iTunes or Android. And for more information, go to www.richdad.com.